Thank you very much for joining our virtual Healthy on the Hudson class tonight. Healthy on the Hudson is part of Hudson River Park's virtual Summer of Fun. All of our free programs are taking place online, and we welcome you to join us any day of the week. More information is available on our website. Healthy on the Hudson is presented by Lululemon and supported by Weill Cornell. Today, we are joined by Dr. Asad Siddiqi, who is a sports medicine physician and assistant professor of clinical rehabilitation at Weill Cornell Medical Center. Dr. Siddiqi, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.
What should people know as we get ready for tonight's class?
So you don't need anything. We're just, this is going to be a little bit of a departure from some of the classes you've had in the past. My hope is that we can just kind of reframe physical activity for you and make you think about it a little bit of a different way.
Great. Thank you so much. If anyone has any questions, feel free to put them into the comment section on Facebook, and we can do our best to answer them at the end of the session, or we'll comment back at a later date after Dr. Siddiqi has taken a look.
Sounds
Have
great.
a great class.
Thanks so much, Kira. Let's get set. All right. Thanks for having me, and welcome everyone who's on the call. I apologize for coming in with a PowerPoint. I know we're all sort of overwhelmed by PowerPoints and you look to these sessions for an escape, but my hope is that this is not too didactic. I want to just give you some tips as you're out there getting back into being active and getting out there trying to come up with new ways to stay active in these interesting times we find ourselves in. So again, my name is Asad Siddiqi. I'm a sports medicine physician with Weill Cornell and New York Presbyterian Medical Group in Brooklyn. And let's get started. So scenes like this can almost bring a tear to the eye, just because they feel like a lifetime ago. You know, as a sports medicine physician myself, and someone who has always engaged with physical activity through the lens of sport, this whole pandemic has really thrown a wrench in the way that I am active. And I know a lot of my friends and a lot of my patients say the same thing. We are used to sports being a way to foster community and to increase the enjoyment of physical activity. And we know that physical activity is such an important part of health, of well-being, both physical and mental. So the fact that we can't congregate like this anymore has really thrown a wrench to a lot of people's routines, and have left people scrambling to try and find new ways to stay active and engaged, and to fight against the challenges of the times that we're in. So we go from that picture to something that's like this. We've seen an explosion in the number of people who have taken up more solitary sports like running, yoga, things that are much more friendly from the standpoint of social distancing and physical distancing, things that, activities that can be done without much equipment or without access to special facilities. And this is sort of how we have adapted in an instant, but we're about 5 months in now, and you know, people are sort of settling into new normals, new routines, and being on the other side of the peak, at least here in New York, it gives us an opportunity to kind of rethink physical activity for ourselves, and kind of reconnect with it in a way that hopefully will allow us to extract as much enjoyment out of it in this new normal. So pandemic or no pandemic, some things have not changed. The minimum recommended weekly allotment of physical activity is still 150 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic activity every week, and at least 2 sessions of some sort of resistance training, which kind of focuses on muscle strengthening. These were the recommendations before the pandemic, and these are the recommendations after the pandemic. It's just after, in this situation that we find ourselves in, we just need to be creative about the way that we achieve it. So my first tip for you is to move. And it's as simple as that. A lot of what has happened in this new scenario is that not only our workout routines, but our daily routines have been completely upended. And so the way that we figured physical activity into our routines, that has also gone away or had to be refigured. So a couple questions to ask ourselves, and I hope you can kind of ask yourself this and use these as points of reflection, because these are sort of what I've been pondering for myself over these past few months. So how has your routine been disrupted? Taking stock of what your daily routine was prior to everything shutting down, whether you were going out to work, how much of your physical activity was sort of built into your daily routine. That's something unique to us New Yorkers, where even the act of getting to work can constitute physical activity. If you walk, if you bike, and that is something that we can sometimes take for granted as having been an important part of our maintenance level of physical activity that goes away when you work from home, let alone the closures of the gym and the closures of sporting facilities and the shutting down of organized sports or classes, etc. So take stock of how your routine has been disrupted, and then you can start to see what were all the areas where you were getting that physical activity and how you can start to think about how you can replace them. The next thing I want you to think about is, where does movement fit into your new daily routine? So if you went from commuting an extraordinarily long way to work, sitting in a car for an hour, sitting on a train for an hour, and that was time that could have otherwise been spent doing something else, this new normal may actually have opened up a lot of time for you to engage in the things that you maybe didn't have time for previously. The flip side of that is, if you were previously walking 30 blocks to work, and now you're walking 30 steps to your second bedroom or to your living room, all of a sudden, that built-in physical activity that you had has gone away, and we have an even smaller amount of things to replace it with, right? You can't just go to the park and play pickup basketball. Can't just go to the YMCA and start and get into a class. Can't go do yoga on the Hudson. So it's it's one of those things that when you sort of see what you were doing before, you can compare it to what you're doing now and see if this has been a net positive or a net negative. And then the last question I'll have you ask yourself is, how can physical activity help you structure your day? I know in the height of the pandemic, when things were really bad here in New York and we were really being strict about staying at home, I mean, it was the experience for me, I'm sure it's the experience for many of you, one day sort of bled into the next, right? We weren't working the way that we were used to. We didn't have those touch points, which helped us break up our day into morning, noon, and night, and allowed us to sort of, schedule the things that we would normally schedule and make time for the things that we would make time for. So can physical activity help you recreate that structure in a situation where you're no longer engaged in that way? Can a morning walk prior to actually starting your work from home routine help invigorate you in the way that a cup of coffee from your local coffee shop might have? Can a brief session of yoga at lunch help sort of, break up time from the morning, allow you to, kind of prevent you from ending up sitting in one position for even longer than you may have when you were at work. A lot of us, who work desk jobs, we have this challenge of finding time to get up, change our position, stretch, exercise within the course of a normal workday. But at least prior to all of this, we had clear demarcation between our sort of workspace and our home space, and that can help facilitate some movement. When your workspace is your home space and you kind of bleed from one into the other, that demarcation isn't there, and that can be a barrier to actually getting up, getting out, and getting moving. So can you insert physical activity strategically into your day to help restructure your day? When we think about physical activity in general, you can kind of break it up into three domains. So there's our activities of daily living, the things that we do just as a function of living in the world. The movement of getting out of bed and standing up, walking, and pulling something out of the refrigerator, the muscles that activates, the energy that requires. That's sort of your baseline level of energy expenditure, and that's something that's constantly happening every day, and is a source of activity. For some people, it constitutes a greater percentage of their overall physical activity than others. Aerobic fitness, sort of the cardio element of physical activity, they typically recommend that you engage in that at least 3 to 5 days a week, but ideally 30 minutes of physical activity 5 days a week. That's sort of the recommended daily minimum to get to 150 minutes. And with that recommendation, they talk about intensity. We talk about moderate physical activity. And it can be a little confusing as to, what constitutes moderate physical activity, because not all cardio is the same. A really simple and easy way to kind of find that sweet spot for yourself would be what's called the talk test. So moderate physical activity is a level of physical activity where whatever activity you are engaging in, you can comfortably hold a conversation with maybe a little bit of strain, or kind of feeling like it's slightly challenging, but you can comfortably hold a conversation without feeling like you're completely short of breath. Some people sort of couch that by saying it's the level of physical activity or the level of exercise where you can hold a conversation, but you can't sing, for example. So using that as a gauge for whatever activity you engage in, it can help you figure out where you are in terms of your intensity. And we're shooting for that kind of sweet spot. And then there's strength training, resistance training, which can be body resistance or weights. And that's something that, particularly when facilities are shut down and normal means of engaging in weightlifting type activities are not available to us, that's one of the areas where we kind of have to be a little bit creative. So my second tip for you is I want you to reconnect with your physical activity. And this is where we kind of step back and get a little philosophical and existential. But I really want you to think about, what is the role of physical activity in your life? Because it means different things to different people. For some people, physical activity is just what their body does to get them up, get them out, have them be productive in the world, and get them home. That's what physical activity means to them, because that's all they connect to. That's the only way that they connect to it. For other people, physical activity or engaging in a sport may actually have a deeper connection, because it may be connected to your identity. If you came up or are currently, a professional athlete, or have strong emotional ties to the physical activity, if it is a means of dissipating and reducing stress, or kind of helps you professionally, if you engage in physical activity as a means, as a part of your kind of professional engagement and interaction. Physical activity can mean different things to different people, and knowing what that role was can help you recreate the physical activity in a way that fulfills that role now. So that's really important to kind of identify and define, and then reassess for yourself as time passes on. Particularly as we go from different phases in our life, like being students to being in college to being professionals, or at different phases of life, that meaning may change, and as a result, the way that you connect with physical activity will likely change as well. So when you when you define that role of physical activity, then I want you to ask yourself, how has that changed in the current situation? And are you still able to derive that same benefit with the way that you're currently engaging in physical activity? For a lot of people, the answer may be yes. For a certain subset of people, the answer may be no, particularly people who are engaged in organized sports, or were engaged in, say, something where you regularly took a class like dance, or something like that. And then I want you to kind of then say, overall, what are my goals in being physically active? What are my exercise goals? And then what steps are available for me to take to work towards them? So that's where you sort of take these first two questions and their answers, and then start to formulate a path forward. Ultimately, if you can kind of break down the physical activity into its most fundamental elements, every physical activity achieves or engages at least one, if not more, of these four cornerstones of physical activity: body control, flexibility, resistance, and aerobic fitness. So, to me, these are the cornerstones, because this is what's required in some combination or some balance to engage in any sort of coordinated higher level physical activity, whether that's walking or whether that's sport. So at a base level, thinking about this from the standpoint of building a foundation for movement by engaging each of these four cornerstones is probably the most useful way to deal with the loss of opportunity to engage in physical activity the way that you're used to. So if you can't go out and take a dance class or perform like you were planning to, or like you love to do every week, finding ways to engage the elements of dance, for example, whether that's, other solitary activities like Pilates or yoga, whether that's just a home stretching routine, that sort of thing. Engaging these elements allow you to keep everything kind of fine-tuned, so that when you have to put it back together again, when that opportunity comes back to us, you're ready for it. Tip number 3 is, I want you to find a way to control your environment as much as you can. Our current situation is so much better than what it was, but there is still risk. The virus is still present in our community. The great news is that transmission levels are probably at the lowest that they've been since this whole thing has started. And for us as New Yorkers, being able to go out and kind of engage with our environment again in a safe way has become much easier than it was a few months ago. That being said, the more you can control your environment in the course of engaging with your physical activity, the better off you will be and the safer you will be, and the more confident, the more kind of fully engaged you can be in that activity. So the questions I want you to ask yourself here are, how do you balance safety and enjoyment? And what I mean by that is, how fully engaged in the activity do you need to be to actually derive some sort of benefit from it? For some people, if they can't go all out, if they can't, go to their neighborhood gym and play 3 hours of pickup basketball every weekend, it's not helpful to them to just have an opportunity to go and shoot around, because they're not engaging with the sport the way that they're used to, and they're not getting as much out of it as they hope to. So again, striking that balance between taking the appropriate precautions and being safe with deriving satisfaction from the sport. Being able to sort of identify those two elements and balance them is crucial to re-engaging with the sport. So as you start to drill down a little further, ask yourself, what are the elements you need to actually get satisfaction from a workout? Do you need to be working out with 3 or 4 or 5 of your best friends so that you are actually socializing while you work out? And is that something that allows you to stay engaged in the activity? Some people can't do exercise on their own. They just, they get too into their head, or they're not people who can listen to music, or they, the way that they have engaged with the exercise and the way that they stay engaged with the exercise, what makes it fun for them is having other people around. And doing that in this scenario can be difficult. Do you actually need a competitive element to your, sport or situation? And, can you recreate that competition to actually stay engaged? Because again, people have different drivers as to why they enjoy what they enjoy. So identifying that for yourself, being able to take stock of that for yourself, will actually give you a good sense of what it is that you need to be looking for if you're going to maybe try to substitute the activity for something else, or partially engage with the activity. And then, so that leads me to my next question, is there another activity or a safer environment that achieves your activity goals? So if you, have taken the step to identify what you're trying to achieve, you've taken the step to identify what you actually enjoy and what keeps you engaged. If you can if you have broken it down to those sort of foundational elements, you can build something else back again. So, maybe if competition is something that you really need, and you were previously, a power lifter, maybe you start to try to challenge yourself in a different way. And, if you can start to put it all into context, hopefully that will allow you to sort of see what else is out there and what else are other people doing that can allow me to achieve these same goals in the safest way possible. And when we look at sort of the layout of risk in activities, you'll see that on the low risk side of things, it's activities that are more solitary, that are outdoors, that allow for space and physical distancing, that are controlled, that don't have a lot of unpredictability to them. And then as you sort of start to increase in risk, it's those activities that move from being outdoors to indoors, activities that involve closer interaction between participants, activities that involve more prolonged or sustained interaction between participants, and activities where ventilation is poor. And then the highest risk activities are those where there's a high degree of unpredictability, there's less control of your environment, they're almost all entirely indoors. There is a lot of respiratory activity happening, whether it's screaming, shouting, singing, kissing, displays of affection, things like that. Um, and those are sort of your higher risk categories. So being able to sort of think about, in addition to your standard precautions that you would normally take when you go out and exercise, whether that's putting on sunscreen, getting the right equipment, all of that, your best bet is finding those activities and drilling down into those activities that allow you to engage in sort of outdoor or ventilated spaces that have smaller groups of participants who are able to physically distance, where the interaction can be controlled in a way that doesn't have people, breathing heavily on each other or breathing heavily in the vicinity of each other, that allow you to wear a mask when appropriate, when you can't physically distance, that allow you to sanitize your hands regularly, that avoid equipment sharing, and that are amenable to these goal-oriented modifications that we've been talking about. So those are sort of the things that are the most optimal activities in the current state where we are. So my next tip for you is, if you stay ready, you won't have to get ready. What that means is, if you can maintain a level of fitness and stay engaged, even at a partial level with your activity, in a thoughtful and goal-oriented way, then when that activity comes back, and all these activities we hope and we pray will ultimately come back, you will be ready for that. And the ramp up will not be steep, because it's those people for whom they are not able to fully engage in their activity, and so they don't do anything. They just relax. And then when the activity is now available to them, they run back to it full steam. Those spikes in short periods of time are where people get injured. And that's, what I've been seeing personally a lot in my patients is it was the ones who, for whatever reason, just weren't able to make the switch to something else, or kind of tread water, as it were, in terms of their fitness when their gym closed, or their dance class closed down. They, with everything else going on, and certainly there's no one would blame you for taking some time for yourself in the current situation, but those people who weren't able to engage in a sort of a baseline level of fitness and went right back to what they were doing when it was available to them, are the ones who are at greater risk of overuse injury, greater risk of traumatic injury, and seem to have trouble getting back to their previous level of function, as compared to those people who sort of maintained sort of a baseline level of fitness throughout, and then gradually ramped up towards the end. And that's the key. It's that gradual ramp up. So even if you didn't do anything over the past few months, that doesn't mean you're behind the 8 ball. It just means try to be deliberate and give yourself the time to get back to doing what you were doing, and take it easy on yourself. It can be, particularly for people who run or who engage in sport as a sort of competitive way. It can be really frustrating when you look at your times, or you look at you look at the weight that you're lifting, and you're nowhere near where you were, and you put in all that work to get to where you were. You will get back there, and you will get back there more safely if you are slow and deliberate in the way that you get back there. So that's what I mean by this. So the questions I want you to ask yourself here are, if your sport or activity is not currently feasible, what type of training will keep you on track? If you're a basketball player and you can't get out there and play pickup or practice with your team or things like that, what should you be doing at home? Well, you should be focusing on your jumping and landing mechanics, plyometrics, keeping up with your cardio, those kinds of things. Those foundational skills, which when you put them together will allow you to kind of get back a little bit more quickly. the next question I want you to ask yourself is there another activity that's complementary to your main sport that is more amenable to the current situation? Again, if you're a basketball player, they don't want you playing indoors in these poorly ventilated gymnasiums. Could you go out and play a little bit of soccer? Something that is, involves cutting, changing directions, that sort of challenges you in a similar, but not necessarily the same way, and is more amenable to something like social distancing? Maybe. And finally, how can you balance your short-term goals with your long-term goals where it comes to sport and physical activity? So again, and this is a little bit more pertaining to people who are engaged in sport at a level where they're trying to achieve something, whether it's high school athletes or college athletes who are trying to make it to, a higher level of sport. When the timeline matters, this can be even more frustrating to have to be shut down in this way. And you should keep that timeline in mind when you're thinking about how you get back, and give yourself adequate time to get back to the level that you need to be. So again, people who rush themselves back may put themselves at risk for an injury, which keeps them out over the longer term. And so we want to kind of balance those short-term and those long-term goals. From a team sport perspective, the lowest risk thing that you can do is that personal work, skill building at home, that's solitary. Anything where you include more people or more travel or less control, such as going from within team competition to an actual competition where people are trying harder and competing to actually win. Those are the elements that put you at higher risk of virus transmission and contracting the virus. So something to kind of consider. Tip number 5, this is the second to last one: be creative. A lot of people, when this all happened and they were facing the prospect of being stuck inside for an indeterminate amount of time, particularly those people for whom the gym was a big part of their life and a sort of a grounding part of their life, weights, exercise balls, yoga mats, workout gear, all that stuff flew off the shelves because people were trying to recreate their gym in their house. And to a certain extent, there are some things that you do need to, that you can't recreate. But simple things, weights, resistance bands, items which can allow you to engage certain muscles in certain ways, or things that you can use to set up individual drills for whatever activity you like to do. A lot of those, you can repurpose a lot of stuff in your house or in your apartment in a way that can make it easy for you. Because the other thing is, particularly for us as New Yorkers, I'm an apartment dweller who has limitations on space, and you want things that can be useful, compact, that don't necessarily add to clutter your space. So think about household items that can serve the same purpose as traditional gym equipment. That's one thing that you can start to brainstorm, and it's a way to kind of have some fun with the activity in a new way. Can you reimagine your work from home setup in a way that's more activity friendly? For some people, I have seen people who have mounted their computer onto a treadmill or a Peloton or some kind of exercise bike or something like that. It doesn't need to be that serious. Making sure that your work from home setup is ergonomically optimized, that your desk is at the right height, your chair's at the right height, you have good lumbar support, you have screens that allow you to kind of be in a good position while you are working. And then also making sure that you give yourself the opportunity to get up, change your position, and move around a little bit, like we talked about before. So can you, that's one thing that's one way you may be able to actually introduce some of that physical activity, or give yourself space for that physical activity that you may not have had previously. And then, thinking again as to how you are motivated and how you actually stay engaged with exercise or sport. Being able to name that and identify it can allow you to think about other ways to achieve that. So, if you were previously someone who was very motivated by their time in running, changing that up to step count. If you were someone who was very motivated by the amount of weight that you were lifting, you could flip that up into the number of stairs that you do in a day, or the number of push-ups that you do. Find a different metric by which to measure yourself and to stay engaged and competitive with yourself. So, like I said, normal gym equipment, all that stuff, you can certainly go in. Soup cans make great weights. Towels make great resistance bands. A backpack full of books, makes a great weight vest. If you're going to be tossing your kid around, I've seen some crazy stuff on the internet. Just please be careful, and remember, safety comes first. And my final tip for you, and this is kind of speaking more broadly to the situation that we're in, is take this time to rediscover your community and to rediscover your purpose. Not just with physical activity, but just in terms of who you are and how the physical activity fits in with that. So the questions I want you to ask yourself from that standpoint: who is in your community, whether that's your physical activity community or your broader community? Who is in your community, and how can your physical activity impact them positively or negatively? Particularly in the beginning of all this, there was a lot of heated discussion when the situation was worse about people being selfish by going outside. And, in the situation we're in right now, luckily that's not so much of a concern. And we are sort of afforded the ability and the space to kind of go outside, and the city has, made some accommodations as to allowing streets to be carless and give us more space to kind of be outside. That's great. But when you think about your community and the people that you engage in physical activity with, whether that's your basketball team or your dance troupe or something like that, it's important to think about, on the positive side, how your physical activity can impact them. So is you staying engaged in a maintenance workout routine going to make it easier on your community when you get back into a performance situation or a competition situation? Probably. So that's one thing that you can use to motivate yourself when it seems like you're not being able to sort of be active the way you want to be. The flip side of that is there can be negative consequences to our physical activity if we're not doing them for the right reasons. And that's where some of that discussion about engaging in activities that are not mask friendly or that are not socially distancing, or physical distancing friendly, getting back into gyms and things like that, where in situations where you're not taking the proper precautions, that can have a major negative impact on not just your physical activity community, but your actual home community. And that's something to be mindful of. So identify who is your community, who are the people that you are engaged with and responsible for, and think about how your physical activity could potentially impact that. Then I want you to think about how your physical activity can be of service to others. We were in a period where a lot of people couldn't really go out of their house, either because they were in high-risk situations or They didn't have anyone available to help them, or the services that they relied on to help them weren't available. And we saw great stories of neighbors coming together and finding ways to take care of those vulnerable people in our community. If you can, if you can turn a love of running or a love of biking into something useful for your community, that's a new way to sort of fulfill some of that purpose that may be missing by not engaging in 5Ks competitively or marathons competitively, something like that. And then finally, what are you doing to contribute to the overall health of your community? So if you can ask yourself that, whether it's on an individual basis by keeping yourself healthy, by keeping yourself fit, by keeping yourself safe, how is that impacting your overall community, positively, from the standpoint of making sure that you're not out there engaging in risky behavior that's going to put you in a hospital or put you in a situation where you're in trouble. So, what are you doing by engaging in physical activity to contribute to the overall health of your community? And again, we want you to stay active, stay healthy, and stay safe. So I should give a shout out to my cousin's running group and some of her friends who these are people who were running fairly competitively and, training for marathons, training for things like that. And all of a sudden in this pandemic, they realized that they were possessed of skills that could be useful in a different way and could actually help those people who were vulnerable and at risk. And so taking some of those skills and donating their fitness, donating their time, their energy that they would otherwise be expending in pursuit of competition, now they're able to sort of engage in mutual aid societies and deliver food and deliver groceries and deliver important items to people at risk. So again, this is a time where we're really trying to reimagine what physical activity means for us. And that's one great way, I think, to do that. So I'll leave you with just a very basic baseline daily activity, physical activity, or a daily physical activity checklist. It's more geared to those of us who are sort of those work from home type people where the physical activity isn't as built in. Make sure you're adjusting or resetting your physical position at least once an hour and take regular breaks from sitting. Like I said, it can be really easy to kind of slide from sitting in front of a computer for work to sitting in front of a couch for TV. And when you don't have any physical separation that involves you getting up, walking to a car, walking to a train, biking home, etc., making sure that you're being mindful of your position so that you don't get those aches and pains later. Making sure that you're engaging in a dynamic warm-up before exercise, so a light aerobic activity just to get the heart pumping before you get out there and do things. This one seems very basic, but it's actually one of the most important things you can do, particularly in activities or particularly in times where your normal physical activities are not available to you. Take each joint in your body through its full range of motion at least once a day. I would recommend doing it multiple times a day, but in those, those times where you get up and you stretch, think about head to toe what it looks like to take your entire body through its range of motion, starting with your neck, arms all the way up, all the way out, all the way in, all the way out like that. Bending forward at the waist, doing a squat, your knees, your hips, your ankles, all of that. Think about each joint that you have and take it through its full range of motion as much, once, twice, 3 times a day. It's a great way to engage and make sure that you're not going to getting stiff when you're not doing the activities that you typically do. Again, we're shooting for 30 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic activity, whether that's a brisk walk, a light jog, biking, doing the steps, and utilize that talk test as a way to kind of gauge for yourself how much, whether you're sort of in that sweet spot. Take each day and kind of, make sure you're engaging in balance and resistance exercises. Again, that doesn't have to be every day, but if you alternate, that's something nice to do. And then when you're done with that sort of period of physical activity, because structuring it can be helpful and scheduling it can be helpful, some light stretching to cool down can be the way to go. And with that, one day we're all going to be back out in Hudson River Park, enjoying each other's company. And in the meantime, we just want to make sure that we're ready for that day by staying safe, by staying healthy, and by staying active. So with that, this is my email address. If you ever have any questions or, clinical or otherwise, feel free to reach out to me. And thank you all for having me on.